All right. How's everybody doing today? Woohoo! Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. I mean, this is such an amazing conference. Imagine having to rent out an adventure theme park to just fit all of you guys in one place. What can be more fun, right? So I'm going to spend a little bit of time today, not talk a lot about Flock per se, but I will introduce you to it at some point during the opportunity part of this presentation. I've had the good fortune of being part of this amazing industry for 20 years. I in fact, even sold some of my companies, but this industry has a way of kind of sucking you back in every time you try to get out. You know, a lot of us have sort of experienced that. Pretty much the same faces year on year, year after year for like the last 2 decades that we've been in this space. And so I'm really going to spend my time in covering, I guess, 3 or 4 different pieces. The first thing I'm going to talk about is sort of an interesting SWOT analysis of this industry. As I said, I've spent 20 years in this space, and I want to talk about my insights, perspectives, and share with you guys some data, et cetera, on what I believe are the collective strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that we have as a hosting, cloud, whatever you call it these days, industry. I also want to spend some time talking more specifically about an opportunity that's close to my heart, and this is kind of partial segue into Flock, but talk about email, collaboration, productivity, messaging, etc. A problem area that I'm really passionate about. And I'll quickly introduce you guys to Flock before we actually settle in. So we're going to try and pack a lot of stuff into this 30-minute session, but before we settle in for a few questions from my friend Christian, probably some fun stuff and some interesting questions and insights there too. I'll start off with a really quick introduction. I started my journey. I got into computers when I was 10 years old. I was in Mumbai, and my school installed the first sort of computer room in the school. And I just love at first sight for me. I spent all my time, lunch breaks, short breaks, every hour after school that I could, programming in what was back then GW Basic. There was no CC++, there was no Windows, there was no internet. We had these 5 1/4 inch floppy drives and green monochrome terminals, and really I spent all my time. It also helped that I was in a boys-only school with no distractions, but I literally spent all my time passionately building software. I started my first company along with my brother when I was 17. That was in the hosting space, which kind of evolved into these 3 brands that some of you might be aware of: Reseller Club, Logic Boxes, Big Rock. We also ran webhosting.info until we exited those businesses, and close to $160 million in value kind of transaction with Endurance International back in 2014. Subsequently, somewhere in the middle, we ran a domain parking company called Skenzo. My brother ran an online advertising company called Media.net, grew that and sold that. And I currently run these 3 companies: Flock, Zeta, and Radix. Radix is, again, a company that many of you will be familiar with. We own some of the most premium top-level extensions in the world, including .store, .online, .website, .site, .space, .tech, and many others. Zeta is in the digital payment space, so we provide payment solutions for consumers, enterprises, merchants, banks, etc. And Flock is basically in the productivity software space, so we compete with G Suite, Microsoft, Slack, and so on and so forth. And so that sort of serves as a quick introduction. All of my companies so far have been entirely bootstrapped and organically grown. I've been privileged and fortunate enough to have that sort of kind of success, as well as sort of the kind of team that backed me up through that process. And so, post that introduction, let me take you guys through sort of the first part of my presentation, which is a basic tool that we're all familiar with, sort of a SWOT analysis of the industry. And I'm going to start with the strengths, right? I guess part of the reason why I keep getting sucked into this industry is one of the things that I love about this space. I mean, if you think about this, I'm going to switch to the next slide and paraphrase this statement, that in many ways, the people at this conference control and influence 90+% of the internet. Like everybody sitting in this room, every single business, project, idea, company that's out there has registered a domain name, set up a website, bought a server, bought some space, set their online presence up with some of you guys. Like every one of the individuals in this room contributes to an industry that in many ways controls or influences the online journey of every single business in the world. And to me, that's just so fascinating that we have this opportunity, this strength where we can actually, there's 200 million plus domain names and websites around the world. And just last year alone, the internet added 60 million more domain names and websites in just 1 year. And this was all, vast majority of it is through the companies and enterprises and businesses at this conference. These sort of get divided into whether it's 10, 11% cPanel Plask, shared hosting, VPS hosting, dedicated hosting, but all of us, in many ways, control and influence a large part of the content and of the websites and of the businesses that exist out there today in their online presences, which I think is an amazing strength for all of us. Which brings me to the next section in terms of opportunities. And I'm going to talk about this in a generic sense, and then specifically an area, email collaboration that I'm interested in. I'll cover that in more detail going forward. But I really love this other notion about our industry, is that we are the genesis of every business idea. I'm going to repeat that statement. We are literally at the genesis of every single business idea. Large companies like, whether it's Microsoft or Google or Amazon, they didn't start out as a 100,000 people company. It started with Sergey and Larry, or it started with, Paul and Bill Gates, or it started with Zuckerberg, or, one or two people started with an idea. And every person in this room and the businesses that we operate in this industry has the opportunity to be at the genesis of that business idea. Like, what do we do when we first have an idea? When any entrepreneur has an idea, right? In most circumstances today, we register a domain. In fact, people actually name their company based on which domain name is available, right? You'll first figure out, hey, what's out there? And you'll kind of figure out, okay, what am I going to name my company? And we have this unique opportunity as the hosting or cloud industry to be at the genesis of every one of these business ideas and start out with that entrepreneur who started out with an idea, with a domain name, with a small website. And we may not necessarily today leverage this opportunity in the best possible way, which is kind of what I'm going to talk about in our threats and weakness section, but we're there at the beginning. Before they hire their first employee, before they register their company sometimes, before they register a trademark, we're right there. And we have the opportunity to work with these entrepreneurs, to work with these businesses, to take them through the journey, starting out as a small 2-people, 5-people company, growing to a SMB, mid-market, enterprise-sized organization. We have the opportunity to start with them from the beginning and help them through their decisions, whether it's software, whether it's marketing, whether it's gathering leads, getting customers, communication, collaboration tools. We have the opportunity to be there through that journey, from chrysalis and cocoon to butterfly, from a small 2-people company to a 500 person enterprise, or a 5,000 or 50,000 person enterprise. And I love this about our space and industry, that we have the opportunity to kind of start with them at the beginning and take them through that journey. I'm going to talk more about the email opportunity and the collaboration opportunity going forward, so I'll skip the slide for now. And let's come to the threats, and of which there are many, but I want to focus my attention on 2 that I think are important for the audience out here, which is that if you look at the last decade or more, our customers have dramatically changed. Right from the baby boomers and the Gen X to the millennials and the Gen Zs today, there have been several trends that we've all been a part of. During this entire course, we have smartphones and driverless cars and AI and so many sort of innovations and advancements in technology that have dramatically changed consumer behavior, consumer patterns. And I'll talk about a few trends that I want to highlight out here. The notion of ownership versus access. There was a time when, as individuals, decade ago or so, when ownership was important, right? We owned cars. We bought a Mercedes or a BMW or a Toyota or a Tesla or whatever it is, right? And now it's all about access. We don't own stuff anymore. We just rent stuff. I mean, we don't even rent assets. We rent time slots of assets, right? We Airbnb, we Uber. So this whole notion and concept of ownership doesn't exist anymore, right? Back in the day, we used to talk about hosting and owning web space and owning a server and having, a cage or a colocation environment. And today it's about renting a computing slice on the cloud, right? Even World Hosting Days has become CloudFest. So if you think about that trend, we've shifted from this mindset of ownership to access. The next trend I want to talk about is that consumers are demanding much better user experiences because that's what they're used to. There was a time when software was just purely functional. And that's what you expected out of a user interface, that give me a functional interface with buttons that let me do stuff. But these days, when you talk about software, software no longer just has to be useful, it has to be beautiful. It has to be elegant. It has to make me feel good. It has to have soul, right? The long gone are the clunky, kind of gray and rectangular interfaces that we used to use in software back in the day. We now expect, as consumers, that our UX and interfaces are elegant, beautiful, and fun to use, right? And so massive shift in terms of expectations of consumers in terms of the kind of interfaces they want to use in terms of software. The next trend I want to talk about is self-research decision-making. And this has had impact on our industry, too. There was a time when, I guess if you wanted to find an electrician, you'd ask your neighbor. If you wanted a good sort of restaurant, you'd ask your friends for recommendations. If you wanted to go on a trip, you'd consult a travel agent and figure out what's a good vacation destination, what are the things that I would do out there. And this was before we had Yelp and TripAdvisor and Uber Eats and Zomato, where now all of these decisions are being made by consumers themselves through self-research, right? And this applies to our industry also. There was a time when buying software would involve talking to your friend who is an IT guru or an IT consultant or a web professional or somebody who can tell you, hey, if you want to use a CRM, this is what you want to use. If you want to install an HR software, this is what you want to use, and so on and so forth. But today, consumers are self-reliant. They don't need complex consultants, et cetera. They can go to online websites like G2 Crowd, Capterra, et cetera, go to Twitter, go to these online forums and find a wealth of information. In fact, the entire industry now of content marketing and inbound marketing are largely because of this. There was a point in time when sales was really the king in terms of getting consumers to adopt your software. Now, customer acquisition is no longer about sales. It's about putting out enough content and information out there to let customers help themselves, to become aware about your solution, how it's going to benefit them, to help their sort of online research and actually be able to make a decision in terms of what software to buy, right? The last trend I want to talk about is this notion of do it yourself versus build it for me. And again, this is a massive trend shift that has taken place in our customer base across just the last decade or so, where there was a point in time when whether it's installing software or writing software or building stuff involved IT professionals, involved them setting systems up on your computers. And now it's all about any small team in any organization or any small company can go online within a matter of minutes, get the most complex or most comprehensive CRM system or messaging or collaboration tools or task management systems installed in less than 10 minutes. You start using them with your entire team. And it's a massive shift. And this, again, if you look at our industry, customers are no longer paying thousands of dollars to web designers and web professionals to design websites. They can now do it themselves. And this trend of building their sites or setting up their solutions more and more and more themselves is only continuing to increase. And so these are some of the trends that I think have had a significant impact on our industry and continue to have impact on our industry. Competition has changed, right? So it's not just customers. When we talk about our threats, competition has changed for more than a decade. And I was part of this industry for 2 decades, running a hosting company for near about 2 decades. And we were selling identical products, right? Every one of us were selling these sort of space on boxes with a near identical experience. Like you've got shared hosting, VPS, dedicated, pretty much the same. Like a hosting company's website, I mean, many of them even today, is literally a template. There's 3 or 4 plans. They have the exact same variables, like, X amount of disk space, X amount of bandwidth, X number of email accounts. We're all selling the exact same product for 20 years, right? It's cPanel or Plesk. And by virtue of this, providing the exact same product, the exact same experience, and making the exact same promise, really the primary USPs that we've been able to rely on, it's pricing. right? I can give this stuff at a discount, domain names at lower prices than my competitor. And our moats, by the way, for most of the hosting companies in the industry have been language, customer support, location, right? I'm a series of a set of hosting companies in Turkey, and because they speak the language and they happen to be in that particular geography, they can actually serve those customers, and that's been their moat. Our moat has not been innovation. Our moat has not been creativity. It's actually been pricing, language, and in many cases, at least the companies that have distinguished themselves, better customer service, which I think is a great moat to have. But cut to the last few years, and it's no longer a rat race of my cPanel versus your cPanel, or my hosting package versus your hosting package. Competition has dramatically changed, right? We're competing with some really amazing products and companies that I think have done really, really well. In fact, if you look at stats, for instance, in the US, we pulled this out from some data. 3 years ago, roughly about 1% of all websites that were registered were pointing to Wix. This is one example, one of the companies that I think has built a great product. And cut to 2018, that number is almost close to 6%. Like that's 6x growth in one market, in a developed market in the United States, in just 3 years. Which shows you sort of back to the kind of trends in terms of how customers have changed in terms of DIY, user experience, et cetera. But that's really where competition is. It's no longer, my round queue versus your round queue. We're competing with competition that's providing a much better user experience and a much better sort of service and much more sort of in terms of capabilities, et cetera. And we've seen this again. I'll cover this chart again, but even in companies that sell shared hosting, so this pie kind of represents shared hosting packages in 2018, and out of, 2016, 2017, 2018. And what we found is even people that buy shared hosting from hosting providers, within 2 to 3 years, roughly at least 10% of them as of today are buying their email from somebody else. Now this is interesting because every one of these shared hosting plans comes with free email. So it says a lot that when you're selling your customers a product that already comes bundled with free email, if 10% of them are choosing to buy something else to service their needs, we're clearly after 2 decades not being able to service their needs. And that to me is an issue as an industry. Competition has better R&D, better UX, and is focusing on innovation. As an industry, we need to leverage the opportunity that we have, but focus on innovation. And that kind of brings me to the last part of the SWOT analysis, which is our weakness. Borrowing from the threat that I spoke about, that consumers have changed, competition has changed, but unfortunately, we have not changed. You were still selling the same products that look exactly the same. I mean, stuff that we sell on webmail for the last 10 years has looked exactly the way it did 10 years ago without any significant meaningful changes. Yes, there are features that have been added to the packages that we provide and the products that we sell, but they look the same for the most part. We haven't really changed in many ways. And so to me, that's a weakness that we need to fix as an industry to be able to truly leverage in a meaningful way the opportunity that we've been given and that still exists for many of us today. And so that's sort of a quick summary on my SWOT analysis, which is, we have an amazing strength. We have access to the entire customer base. We have an outstanding opportunity because every single idea, every business idea in the world starts out with our industry in some form or the other. They're interacting with us. They're creating a trusted relationship with you guys. But there's been changes in consumers and competition, and we truly need to change with the times to be able to leverage that, right? I've got a few more minutes left. I'll sort of wrap up with part 2 and part 3. I'm really passionate about email, messaging, video calling, communication, collaboration, because I think that one of the biggest areas of inefficiencies in many companies stems from poor communication tools. And so at Flock, we've built a suite of, and I'll introduce you to that, email, messaging, video calling, and a couple other sort of, a couple other products. But let me talk about the opportunity real quick with 2 slides. This is something we did. We actually took cohorts of domain names, large enough, statistically significant, kind of followed them across multiple years in terms of what percentage of them have MX records by sort of proxy, therefore potentially some sort of an email service. And we found that in the first year, typically 20% of any cohort of domain names that are registered have an MX record. But by the time you progressively take that same cohort to year 1, year 2, year 3, so end of year 1, year 2, year 3, it grows to 32, 46, and 59% by third year. Domains that were registered 3 years ago that are still existing today, close to 60% of them are looking at email, professional email, in some form or the other. It's a massive opportunity. In fact, that number is probably higher than the number of active websites on those domain names at that point in time. And what's typically happening, unfortunately, though, we see in the hosting industry, I kind of showed you this pie chart before, is that a lot of customers end up either, a small subset of them end up using and leveraging email and collaboration tools from the providers that they buy the domain name and hosting package from. But a chunk of them then shift to more premium email offerings. And a chunk of them, funnily enough, forward their business professional email to their Gmail account because it's a better interface, it's something they're used to, and they want to continue using it, right? So premium email and personal email end up dominating most of the usage or most of the engagement time of these consumers. Are actually paying today for hosting plans and hosting packages. And people are willing to use, random Gmail accounts more than business professional email addresses. I'm going to skip this slide, but we did a bunch of surveys amongst consumers, and some of the top reasons for people who've bought domain names, bought hosting packages, still continuing to use whether it's personal email or any other email offering is better user experience, better features, and no other options from web hosts. And that's where we saw a gap, and kind of, I'll segue into sort of a few minutes of our solution. Again, I'll skip some of the stuff, but with Flock, our goal and objective is to work with this entire channel that I've been familiar with for the last 20 years to plug in that gap. We've built a suite of products that comprises of email, calendar, contacts, and video calling. Again, I'm going to run through all of this. I don't want to spend too much time on our products, but I want to illustrate the opportunity. We've got a beautiful email interface that works in browser, Chrome, Firefox, Safari. We've got native desktop clients for Mac, Windows, and Linux. And we've got a native client for iOS and Android with amazing sort of new age features that you would really truly expect to provide to consumers these days. Conversation threading, advanced search, full text indexing, integrated video calling, etc. Beautiful calendar with, again, all the sort of conventional features that you would expect in calendars and contacts and so on and so forth. Again, I'm going to skip a bunch of this stuff. The entire suite was built ground up to be partnering with this channel for actually facilitating filling that gap. And so we do have sort of cPanel integrations, provisioning APIs, and a WHMCS module and things like that for companies to integrate. But for me, that part was just more like a quick introduction. Really, I want to conclude this presentation by re-illustrating the main points that I spoke about in my presentation, which is we do, ignore the sort of keeping aside the negatives that we have to really work on. We do still have an amazing strength. We still have millions and millions of consumers that are constantly coming to us every single month and year. We have an amazing opportunity to be at the genesis and the beginning of that customer's journey and take them all the way through their sort of growth path. We need to change with the times and look at sort of untapped opportunities in meaningful ways. And with that, I'll end my presentation. Thank you very much, and I'll invite Christian to join me on stage to ask a few
very much.
questions.
Let's give Bhavin a round of applause for some really great insights. Thanks. Great. And now we're going to spend a few minutes. We got about 10 minutes or so. I'm going to add 5 to that. And we're going to get to know you a little bit, which I think is really exciting. These were some great insights that you had. And your passion for this industry is really palpable. We can tell that you're really excited about it, and you sort of believe in these people as the people that are changing the world. And so, I agree with you there, and I wanted to thank you for that insight and the passion that you share for
Well, I'm one of them, so it becomes easier I drink the Kool-Aid too, so.
But I did say that we wanted to get to know you a little bit. So here's what I want to start, because you have great insights to the industry. You're in this industry on a daily basis. You're running 3 companies, right? What do you have? Do you have time for fun? What do you do when you want to relax?
Well, it does help that I really, really, really love what I do. One of my favorite Steve Jobs quotes is, find something you love to do so much you can't wait for the sun to rise all over to do it again. And I truly imbibe that. Like I can't literally wait for every single day to kind of do it all over again. I love, physical and mental activities. So I do try and stay fit. I like snowboarding, though I had a nasty accident 3 years ago. I play squash and badminton sometimes. I love escape rooms. I don't know if anybody here kind of knows of them, but they're all over the place. Like
Really cool.
they lock you in a room for 60 minutes, and you have to solve all these puzzles to get out and stuff. So I do them now and again in my spare time. So yeah, I do indulge in some activities outside of just product software and companies.
That is cool. I love the escape rooms too. It's really good for problem-solving minds. So let's go back to I'm interested in taking us all the way back to the beginning of your journey. This thing is called From Founder to Billionaire. Like, did you set out to say, "Oh, I'm gonna start a bunch of stuff and become a billionaire"?
I don't think almost anybody that has gotten there has started out that way in any form whatsoever. I think in many ways, money and valuation. So one of the things that I keep talking about to budding entrepreneurs is focus on value and not valuation. I think valuation is a side effect. It's a consequence. When you run a business and truly and meaningfully create value for your customers, valuation will follow, money will follow, and so none of that has ever been a goal. I was telling David backstage that to me, I think, I always believe frustration is the genesis of entrepreneurship, and so when I see these problems, like with Zeta in the payment space or with Flock, it was born out of also looking at our internal communications and inefficiencies in those, and inefficiencies in our industry, and so on and so forth. But when I look at a problem, I really sort of am driven and motivated to solve it. And another thing that I really fundamentally believe in is that each of us, like every single human on this planet, we have a moral obligation to make an impact that's proportionate to our potential. And I really believe in that fundamentally. I think all of us have an amazing gift of life, and we have the opportunity and therefore the obligation and duty to make a difference in the world, and that's what kind of drives me. And so yeah, back in the day, I guess it was, again, I used to be a math and physics geek, so computer science became a natural progression. That's how early on in my life, between the ages of 10 to 14, I figured out, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur, and it's got to be in computer science. And the internet came into the country in India, and I was fascinated by what opportunities it had. And so that's when me and Div, we started our first company in hosting and domain names, and then took the journey from there. Became the first active ICANN accredited registrar. So we started off as a 2Cows reseller in '99, and then 2000 we applied for our accreditation and launched 2001 our registrar, then launched Reseller Club, Logic Boxes, Big Rock, and then kind of just grew from there.
And you keep on going back to the well with entrepreneurial opportunities all the time, like Flock. I suppose that was, what's going to be a fun next challenge going up against Microsoft and Google?
Well, I guess once you've built a certain base, bigger and bigger challenges are what kind of attract you at some point in time. It's like you want to solve the bigger problems in the world, and I'm humbled by and stand on the shoulders of some amazing entrepreneurs that have done that time and again. And so for me, that's inspirational and that's motivation to continue down that path myself.
Can I hang on Flock for a second and have you tell us a little bit more about what the differentiators are for what you've got there?
Absolutely. So I think there's 2 or 3 key differentiators when we look at our suite, especially as it pertains to the channel. With Flock, I think so I see solutions at 2 ends of the spectrum. On the one end, there's solutions that we're providing right now that haven't caught up with the times, don't have basic features like conversation threading or an advanced UI or fundamental features and capabilities. And then there's solutions the other end, which is your contenders like Google and Microsoft. And there's nothing in the middle where actually I think 80% of the audience sits when they're in their initial stages of the journey. As an SMB, Google, Microsoft, etc., amazing products, but have a large focus on the enterprise. Their price point, their capabilities, features, focus sort of demonstrates that. With Flock, so for instance, one of the things that we've done is we've integrated these interesting capabilities like video calling and basic CRM features into our email collaboration messaging software, because we feel like a 500 people company will probably buy WebEx or Zoom, will buy Salesforce, will buy G Suite, will buy like 5 different softwares, but a company that's 5 people doesn't want to deal with that notion of buying 5 different tools to just communicate and collaborate. So we focused on features that we think are essential, having built a successful hosting business ourselves, we know what the consumers want, so we think we're much better off there. And the manner in which we're approaching this with our channel and with our partners when it comes to pricing, integration, co-branding, co-packaging, we really want to partner with the industry and co-create this experience as opposed to treat the industry just like an affiliate channel that is sending leads our way. And we think of that not just as a strategy for as a strategy for that differentiates us, but as a strategy that will actually help us build the product better because we'll be closer to the customer with help from the industry, and we'll actually be able to make a material difference in that respect.
It's really interesting, and it seems to really solve a problem. One of my goals in talking with you here in front of these people was to try and make sure that they got a little advice as entrepreneurs, those of them who are entrepreneurs, from you. And you've already given some really good advice. You've said to focus on value, not valuation. But that comes in the realm of trying to solve a problem. Do you have advice on how they can find good problems to solve?
Well, actually, that's the one area that I don't think anybody needs advice on, because good problems to solve are friggin' all around us at all points in time. Part of the reason why I'm running 3 companies, not necessarily something that I would recommend to people, is because I keep getting tempted when I see newer and newer problems to start newer and newer companies, and it's just not sustainable from a personal standpoint. But with Zeta, which is my kind of latest venture on the payment side, again, it's this whole frustration of like the payment ecosystem is just so broken. The fact that cash still exists is an anomaly. It's surprising that it still exists out there. The fact that digital payments in many occasions take longer than cash transactions, cost more, all of these are anomalies. And when I see an anomaly at a fundamental level, I feel like there's something wrong there, and I start researching the space and figuring out how to solve it. But truly, if I was to look at meaningful advice, I can kind of add 2 more nuggets to the kind of focus on value versus valuation. One would be hiring the best. I can tell you for a fact that none of my success has any amount of relevance to my abilities and capabilities as much as it does to the kind of team that we've created. And if anything, I think my success has been in being able to constantly identify the best of the talent and bring them together to create the best of products and experiences and strategies. And so hiring the best is something that I think I still spend 30% of my time focusing on recruitment activities. I guess this might sound very cliched as an entrepreneur, but I'll tell you it's golden advice, and it applies to every single entrepreneurial journey, which is never give up. Like, just keep at it at all points in time. We all go through sort of ups and downs, etc. And fundamentally, for me, the notion of failure is just an experience that's taught me another way that something doesn't work. And so now I have a higher probability of success because I've eliminated one more path that doesn't work.
Great. I've just got a couple more really quick questions before we end our session. And I want to know what's the one thing that you're most proud of in your long history, and one thing you wish you've done better.
Well, I'm going to just borrow from the previous answer. I'm most proud of my team and the people that we have. I love working with these guys. I keep telling folks sometimes that one of the reasons why I love going into work is how often I'm proven wrong by my team, which is so exciting because you get challenged on a constant basis and you get to work with really smart people. I guess one thing I could have done better, so I would say some of the biggest mistakes I've made, one of the biggest wastages in many ways in terms of inefficiencies throughout my entrepreneurial journey is I'm a product guy, or at least I thought I was really good at it, and that's really sort of coming to the lesson that I've learned, is my biggest mistakes have been building lots of things that weren't relevant. And over time, I've realized more and more so how to kind of validate my hypothesis in a better way. Talk to customers early on. Get your product out there as soon as possible. Don't build it in silos for years and then launch something and realize it doesn't work. And so this kind of fast iterative cycles, rapid pivots, fail fast, fail early, like move fast, break, like all these fundamental principles that you hear as like now like kind of truisms across the industry are things that I've learned the hard way and spent a lot of time building stuff that didn't really work out eventually because I had an idea and I had a hypothesis that was clearly wrong, and it could have been easily validated with much lesser effort than going out there with 100% conviction. And I'm not saying that the latter doesn't help, by the way. I also believe this kind of, I guess, as another element of entrepreneurship, that entrepreneurs do need a healthy dose of delusion. And so that level of conviction is actually important in many respects, but recognizing the right strategy and path to get there is also something I've learned along the way, especially in product.
That's great. And my very final question is inspired by the fact that we're sitting next to a time machine, which is sort of a superpower. So I want to know, what would be the superpower that you would want?
It's a fun question. I guess I've thought about it, interestingly enough. I think, and I have a reason behind it, I think immortality. And the way I think about it is that if you have an infinite lifespan, you can technically get all the other superpowers because science will eventually catch up. And so, we can already fly because we've got flying machines in some sense. At some point in time, every other, whether it's seeing through walls or whatever else it is, if you have infinite time, I'm pretty sure we can eventually obtain every other superpower. So that's the kind of superpower that trumps them all in some ways.
That's great. Thank you so much. Everybody, Bhavin Turahkia.
Thank you. Thank you very much.